for team retrospective discussion. We'll be following this similar format that we've been doing since 13.2, with some minor changes from the feedback we received around those retrospectives. So there's a set of summary slides and a summary discussion that you can watch in your own time. We're going to focus on discussion topics that have come out of the retrospective document. So we'll set aside about 5 minutes to discuss improvement tasks from last time. Then we'll have 2 topics at about 7 minutes each. And then we should have a couple of minutes at the end to discuss improvement topics that we'll take forward for 13.5. So let's start with improvement tasks from last time. Jerome, are you available to verbalize?
Yep. Hey, everyone. So last time we had an improvement task to create a first iteration of an experiment workflow that can be used across the growth teams and then eventually across the rest of product. So we've now gone and defined an experimentation process, and we also formed an experimentation working group to further build out that process and the tooling. So just a special thanks to Dallas and Phil for leading both of those efforts. On to you, Christopher.
Yeah, we had 2 stragglers from development who had not completed their DIB training, and they both completed it this month. So we are 100% DIB trained. So that's awesome news. On to you, Craig. And if Craig isn't here, John, do you want to verbalize?
Sure. So Craig's item from last time, the delayed feedback loop from collecting data for our telemetry efforts, came up a couple of times in our retro. We were unable to improve some ability for analyzing feedback by getting SciSense access for Matthias and Qingyu. But as noted in our retro, the feedback cycle is painfully slow. We don't have a solution for this problem yet, but some ideas have been thrown out in our retro that we can investigate if future development drives the need. And Craig has said that he has created an issue to start tracking ideas and taken some steps so far. So they have their own GCP project, group memory testbed, so that they can more quickly test different scenarios such as image
Yeah, hey John, I'm here. Sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah, so yeah, we haven't made as much progress as I would have liked, but yeah, we have created an issue to start tracking ideas. We do have our own GCP project, so we can more quickly test different scenarios. We can get a faster feedback loop there. One of the early frustrations about data feedback was just having access to SciSense. We had a limited number of licenses, but we were able to get through that and get all the team members who needed it so that they could quickly create the dashboard so we could see the feedback more quickly. And then we will continue to document the long feedback cycles and continue to make suggestions or just implement improvements there. So I see Jerome is giving some feedback.
Yeah, I guess I'll verbalize. I was just putting that note so you could read it later, but the long feedback cycles are mostly due to the data availability and being tied to a 30-day release cycle and self-managed and having to import that data into the data warehouse. We've got a couple of things which we're currently working on, which I've linked to there.
Yep. Thank you.
Cool, I have the next one. We were looking to further enhance our visibility from development on infrastructure, in particular during rollouts. We were able to get an issue started that Wayne and Marin have already started collaborating on. Please also add your notes if you have any interest in this. We also have a Q4 OKR around stable counterparts, and I've already added this this particular issue to next month's update, so we can hear back from Wayne and Marin on what we've been able to get stabilized as far as the training goes. Lucas.
Yep. So a follow-up on the GDK GitLab development kit versus GitLab Compose kit discussion and desirable improvements of the GDK. So it's really just a minority of developers at GitLab who are using the GitLab Compose kit. In a recent survey, just 3 out of 146. And those are mainly on Linux. The GDK is used by loads of more people with different use cases, and so it might be the signal to noise ratio. We just run into more issues because more people are using it, especially in the last, more UX people have started using it this quarter. And I don't see any concrete action items as of now that we need to take or from the feedback in the retro, or any reason to shut down any of the current efforts at GDK or GCK. And I've created an issue to discuss it further. There are a lot of improvements that are planned for the GDK, but movement has been a bit slower because we have just one engineer working on it full time. And with the current situation this year, the team member was also affected by it. So yeah, if you have any concrete feedback on the GDK or problems you run into, always raise issues so that we can react and improve the GDK for everyone. Yeah, I don't know if it goes back to Jean or directly to the discussion topics.
We can go directly to discussion topics. So I think we're just about on time. So Lindsay, are you available to verbalize?
I am. Hi, John. I'm here. So the threat management team is a relatively new team, and for about 10 months, we've been having consistent retrospectives. We haven't made a lot of changes, and we've had very good involvement. I would say the last 2 milestones, we've started to see a bit of a fall off, both in the subdepartment-wide synchronous discussion and our issue. So I'm just looking for ideas and ways to get people excited about it again, and get some honest feedback from the team on specifically how to improve things.
Donald, are you available?
Yeah, I'll verbalize what I had there. We also had a typical or less than typical amount of discussion in our 13.4 retro. During our weekly sync meeting last night, I asked the team if they had any thoughts as to why discussion was less. General feeling was that there just wasn't as much to discuss in 13.4. May have been a one-off. But that being said, we have had a similar down couple of milestones a few months ago. We ended up changing the templated questions we asked. It seemed to help encourage a little bit more discussion. So a small change like that may be warranted and may help out. It's also mentioned this time that milestones seem to blur a little since we're moving pretty quickly. So we're thinking of maybe tweaking the retro description to better highlight our accomplishments, possibly put together a retro video similar to the global one we have after the end of a milestone.
Yeah, Donald, just really curious. I think you can answer it at the end there, but is it the blurring a bad thing or a good thing? Because like blurring continuous delivery is a good thing, you could argue, but blurring losing line of sight accomplishments is probably a bad thing from that perspective. I think it's the latter is kind of what you're articulating. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yep, I would agree.
I've got the next point. Lindsay, before I read my point, I wanted to ask, how frequently is your retrospective?
We're just doing it the week prior to this retrospective. So we open up our issue for feedback, and typically a lot of discussion has happened in that issue in the past. So, there was definitely some observations that, the summer weather was distracting people and such, but sorry. Once a milestone for the synchronous discussion and then the ongoing discussion in the issue.
All right. So we moved to using our retrospectives not only to be purely what worked, what didn't work, what can we improve. We're using it a little bit more as a giving a praise and showing appreciation to team members. So we've got different sections in our retrospective, and that section has actually become really popular and the one we all look forward to. The other thing we've also done is to share the responsibility of who's leading the retrospective each milestone. So we rotate on a regular basis. I found that like for me, it can get very mechanical very quickly, and you don't always have something to say. And so if you bring but once people do start talking on the call, then there's a lot to say. So getting them excited to be on the call has been the key thing. And so we used something different to just the general questions. It does require us getting synchronously on a call and some team members sacrifice based on time zone issues. But that so far has been really helpful for us.
Thanks. And time zone issues have been a problem. We find that we have one earlier synchronous discussion that has more involvement, and then the second one, I always, it's a little bit like, well, here's what was said earlier in the day, which isn't as helpful.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've found to be helpful is regular cadence around retrospectives within the team. Some teams are using different cadences for iterations, just to review what work is going on and etc. And having a retrospective cadence around that, linked to the package teams retrospective in their handbook, and they also have a link to the GitLab Unfiltered, where they upload all of their meetings to that, so you can actually view those retrospectives. I think the benefit there is actually getting people in the habit of actually thinking about what's gone well and what hasn't, and sharing that, and it becomes less of a kind of discomfort of identifying areas of improvement and more of a feeling of success each time. And the other thing, which I think aligns a little with what Jean was saying, was the sort of a little more guided around the async retrospective, whether that's around the values or specific initiatives, I think helps people sort of know where they can give feedback and prompts people to give feedback. Maybe that's focusing a little much, but still always options for open-ended feedback as well.
We're
Thomas?
running up against time a little bit. Thomas, do you want to verbalize yours?
Yep, sure, happy to. So just adding to the signal, we noticed the same kind of trends, or at least it has been noticed within the sub-department synchronous retros and the issues that we have for that. And 3 bits of feedback have come forward from it, in that they're big, it's time consuming, and it's causing people to consider how much time they're need to invest whenever they have commentary they want to add. A lot of folks are also starting to scope their commentary towards their individual teams as opposed to towards the entire sub-department. And the third one is that there simply just aren't enough prompts during the iteration for people to remember to do so till the very end. So we're still working through what to do with this, but it was interesting feedback to get, and nonetheless.
Cool. And I just thought maybe we should put the praise section, a praise section in the summary retrospective. So if you think that's a good idea, please add your vote there. It looks like we've got at least 3 people. It feels like maybe we need 5 positive votes, and then John, maybe we add it. I'm keen to experiment on this. I just don't want to, if anybody has any concerns, I just want to make sure we address those. Well, it looks like we got enough votes now.
Yeah,
so.
it looks like we've got a quorum. Yeah, I'm happy to add this as an action item for next time. Even better if we could get some of the teams to report back on how it went for them to have this section in the next one. So if anyone wants to take responsibility from it, 2+1, go right ahead. So we're pretty much up against time. So we have a second discussion item. Jean, would you like to verbalize?
Sure. So in our last retro, one of the things that came up was that there's areas of the code base that doesn't naturally kind of like align with a specific group. And so it's difficult to know who to reach out to get more information. And these are areas that are particularly potentially not well documented. Our specific example was we needed to introduce a new config file for the static site editor, and Chad, our engineer, was looking at the internal config file API, and didn't seem like there was a lot of documentation or any actually around it, and it wasn't immediately clear who would have some knowledge about this. We did eventually find, by reaching out in Slack and so on, we did find somebody who could give some guidance. But I also know there's some other areas of the code base that are that aren't naturally aligned with a specific group. So having domain experts in our code review process it makes it tricky sometimes to know who to reach out to, especially when the documentation is sparse. John, you have the next point on that.
Yeah. So basically, we've had this exact same problem with Homestead, but there are two different things. There are groups who want to change GraphQL to add a feature, and then there's a small set of almost volunteers who look after the actual infrastructure and make decisions about, what type of authentication to use, or philosophical decisions about what the API should do, like whether you should have, individual mutations for everything or a single mutation for every object. And it creates the same problems. It's like if you make a change to GraphQL, you would presumably prefer a domain expert to review it. So some of those people who find themselves commonly in these discussions grouped together, created a GraphQL channel, set up GraphQL office hours, and Charlie also created a group under GitLab.org so that anyone can kind of join that group, but by doing so, you kind of make yourself available to take part in discussions and be tagged in discussions around where GraphQL should be taken. But you still end up with the same problem, which is it's a largely very, very technical area, and it falls to 1 p.m. to schedule these issues and to one group to kind of take care of these issues.
Yeah, I thought we've been discussing the idea of self-nominations about area of expertise in code, or at least, identifying people who say I've worked in, Workhorse is a good example that's kind of topical from time to time, so that we could have a lookup. A friend of mine's actually at their company working on a Slack bot that does this, that goes and looks up that data, which could live, I mean, not that we want to dump everything in the team YAML, but I see Craig mentioning that dump in the team YAML and then have a lookup. And the other idea that I had was to be looking up in the people who've committed to the code area as a sort of a function of, I've created an MR and I can actually see the people who've regularly committed to the area. Yeah, Craig.
Yeah, so regarding domain expertise, right, we have the field in Team YAML, and then we have that project page in the handbook that will show, like in this example, if someone has GraphQL expertise. It doesn't help with the group ownership of projects, but it certainly should help with the domain expertise question. And maybe it's just an underutilized piece of the Team YAML. We just need to maybe remind folks to update it on a regular basis.
Yeah, Christopher, you have the next point.
Yeah, I don't know if this would necessarily apply, but it would be an interesting case to think about from a dogfooding perspective. But Google Software Engineering book, which is a good read, one particular chapter they talk about code search and making that really effective. And I wonder if there's ways that we could potentially hook in with our searching capabilities to potentially provide this information, or if that was something we would want to think about potentially down the road. Or is it we're just at the point where we still just need to even define the areas and treat it more in a directory kind of fashion?
Is that where you would use code search to find the people who've most contributed changes to a piece of code?
Yeah, I mean, that's one way to do it, right? Is if you were saying, okay, well, here's a piece of code, let me go figure out how quickly to find who's been mucking with it. And you can oftentimes look at the commit log, but it might be easier if we had some capabilities around that. I'm trying to remember if users is currently on the list of the code when we do a code search. I don't think it is, but something else to think about.
You can get blame on most files, and I find that I use that a lot. But yeah, as Craig and Dan were mentioning, there are two problems. One is finding people to review, and the other one is who makes the decision when they're very, very close. And at the minute, in GraphQL terms, documentation is maintained by this small group, getting started guides, but also things like, authorization, authentication, even just broader philosophical choices, whether we're GraphQL first. And actually, Charlie opened an issue, which I've linked just below Jean's comments, that has some of the unanswered questions that we're still trying to answer just with respect to GraphQL. John, does any of this help with the topic that you brought up?
Yeah, I think the two things that stand out for me is obviously looking at Git history and seeing who worked on it. That's an obvious one. And sometimes that engineer isn't at GitLab anymore. I think the second part is the domain expertise. We had a good initial update to that team YAML file with that. We still don't have good coverage from everybody listing their expertise, and maybe we should ask managers to drive that with their teams to update that, and we could get some better coverage. The expertise filter through to the projects page in the engineering section of the handbook, and that's an obvious place to look for somebody who has specific expertise. So maybe we should just focus actually on another refresh of the domain expertise in Team YAML.
Yeah, we could take an action from that if you would like.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. John, maybe you and I take the action, and if anybody wants to volunteer to help with that. John Hope, I should say, not John Duplessis.
I think I could probably help. I've looked a lot at just the stages and the category YAML files on the product side and trying to assign product managers to be able to do some tracking of certain features. I see this as somewhat similar, where we're looking at tagging certain files within our project and assigning owners there as well.
Thanks for volunteering, Jerome. You've been tagged.
I think from the search side, well, one thing is we can keep updating the document about domain expertise more frequently, and also once we have the updates, yeah, search team can help. Well, it's indexed, then probably we can tell our users just type a few words in the search, then we'll be able to find the result very quickly.
Cool, thanks. Okay, we're running low on time, so I'll jump ahead to the next section. So improvements we're going to track for 13.5. The last two have come from this discussion, so we can just verbalize the first three if you would like. Ricky, are you available to verbalize?
Sure thing. Yeah, like you mentioned in the video for this call, we're seeing an influx in issues that are added in the middle of the milestone. And so we're going to start using labels to kind of track where those mid-milestone issues are coming from in order to kind of break down and categorize them so we can better see what changes we need to make in order to reduce that number.
Excellent, thank you. Nick, are you available? Oh, he's not. Okay, I can verbalize for him. Nick says, we're asking team members to shadow our more experienced engineers during support calls to help spread the responsibility for these escalations. Since the level of customer support required from geo development engineers can vary greatly from release to release, this will be an effort to track over multiple releases. Cool. Christopher, you're up next.
Yeah, we have this one from last time that we created the issue around training. We'll follow up on it again next month for that.
Thank you. Darby, can you verbalize for Elliot?
Sure. Yeah, so this item was a follow-up on some issues we were running into around kind of getting a lot of work in progress and not finishing things. So making some adjustments to focus on mean time to merge over overall throughput with the hypothesis that it's going to help both. So instead of starting a lot of things and then like getting jammed up in review, we'll focus on getting those things finished first and then moving on. So we're gonna work on that for this upcoming milestone and see how that impacts us.
Excellent, thank you. So the last two items came from our retrospective discussion here. So that nearly wraps us up. If you wouldn't mind, just scroll to the top of the document. There is a link to a retrospective of the retrospective. If you wouldn't mind telling us whether this format's actually working for you, or if you would make any changes. And of course, you can continue to discuss the topics async in the doc or reach out on Slack. Thanks everyone for attending, and I'm looking forward to getting the feedback on whether the retrospective worked for you. Thanks.